Good afternoon. I am grateful to CREID, especially to Professor Maurice Chadros, for inviting me to say a few words at the launch of two key reports on India and Nigeria, tracking the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on religious minorities. I also want to congratulate the authors of these excellent reports that not only enhance our understanding of the severe impacts caused by the pandemic, but also provide useful guidance for policymakers. And as I will suggest in a moment, the insights in these two reports point to the need for further normative clarification or elaboration of the human rights framework regarding religious freedom. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to devastate lives and exact a high toll on all communities worldwide. Some of the impacts of the pandemic are quite obvious and have been well documented. But there are also effects that do not immediately become apparent, including lifelong changes and intergenerational impacts. It has, of course, been clear to many that the pandemic is more than a public health catastrophe, and that it demands carefully designed and diligently delivered measures, not just in the health sector, but across all aspects of life. A pandemic of this scale and duration will undeniably have multiple intersecting impacts that aggravate the consequences of every dimension of inequality and vulnerability. And as these carefully researched documents demonstrate, it has reinforced pre-existing inequalities and vulnerability. This we have seen around the world as an extension of the challenges that duty bearers face in addressing concerns in private spheres, who has effects of extensive restrictions on various freedoms and rights that have undermined the agency and autonomy of individuals. Where the state fails to respect, protect, and promote the agency of individuals, the most vulnerable suffer the worst. Just as there are overlaps in the vulnerability of persons and groups, the failure of the state to discharge obligations to respect, protect, and promote human rights also leads to multiplier effects. In a world where religious identity is becoming increasingly salient, intolerance and discrimination based on gender belief can also have multiple overlapping impacts that increase the vulnerability of communities exposed to such intolerance. The question before us then is, what can we do to address this perfect storm, as it were, of intersectional vulnerability linked to religious identity? Responding to the compounding effects of multiple vulnerabilities requires mobilizing synergies amongst those who may have been previously working in silos. I have been speaking about the necessity of such interdisciplinary, multi-faith, and cross-boundary approaches, including developing unusual collaborations. The goal is not only to harness synergies or to pool efforts and resources, but also to address politicization and identity-based politics that undermine human rights work. These trends can be even more pronounced when efforts are made to address indirect discrimination, which often go against majoritarian or populist sentiment. In several of my UN reports, I've highlighted examples of good practice, such as community-level collaborative projects that builds societal resilience. In some reports, I have dealt directly with addressing intersectionality. In addition to harnessing synergies, crucial to addressing intersectionality is advancing the agency of rights holders. This requires some background conditions, such as respect for the rule of law. In addition, it calls for a targeted and participatory approach that responds to the lived realities of specific groups, rather than looking for downloadable and generic solutions. There are tools within the UN system that can support such a targeted, participatory, and inclusive approach, sometimes called the policy or operational approach to implementing human rights on the ground. Essential to this approach is the engagement of the rights holders in determining the objective and subjective measures of the enjoyment of their rights. This approach also involves identifying specific elements or attributes of each right, for example, equality before the law or justice, which are fundamental to enjoying freedom of religion or belief, as the reports from Nigeria and India demonstrate. This methodology, which focuses on indicators linked to structure, process, and the outcome, is particularly well suited to addressing intersectional aspects of vulnerability. It seeks the participation of rights holders. It can empower them, clarify state obligations, create more transparency, make progress more measurable, and enable accountability. This approach can be very usefully incorporated into the pursuit of the SDGs. It is also consistent with the long-standing commitment of the UN to mainstreaming human rights. However, both these frameworks, of course, need to engage with the full spectrum of human rights covered under freedom of religion or belief, to which that has been lagging. I just want to highlight that these reports that we are launching today speak glaringly to the need to clarify or elaborate the normative understanding we have of freedom of religion or belief. It will be 40 years next week since the UN last formulated in some detail its understanding of freedom of religion or belief. The 1981 UN Declaration, the elimination of all forms of intolerance and of discrimination based on religion or belief. The declaration provides a very important insight in Article 2 by linking intolerance based on religion or belief to any form of discrimination in intent or effect that undermines the enjoyment of any human right, economic, social, cultural, political, or civil. The principles and commitments in this article draw, among others, on the commitment to non-discrimination, Article 2 of the two covenants. As CREID's work has shown in these two reports and elsewhere, there is a need to examine carefully the application of the 1981 Declaration, including in regard to hidden forms of discrimination. I also want to add that it is also time for a more explicit recognition or elaboration of the commitment made in the Common Article 3 in the two covenants on the equal entitlement of women and men to the enjoyment of all human rights. Realizing this commitment is crucial to addressing some of the most widespread intersectional impacts we have seen during the pandemic, especially striking form where there is rampant intolerance, as these two reports testify. Engaging with this global commitment goes hand in hand with the SDGs. It will be crucial to advancing the autonomy and agency of all right holders, with enabling human rights movement to transcend many silos and to mobilize synergies. In concluding, I want to again pay tribute to all who contribute to the two reports before us. I look forward to further engagement on the issues raised in these two reports. Thank you.